Good morning. I will now call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Development to order. My name is Caitlin Cleveland, and I am the MLA for Cam Lake and the chair of this committee. The NWT Legislative Assembly Standing Committee on Social Development is made up of regular members who can look deeper into social issues affecting NWT residents. Amongst its other responsibilities, committee is currently conducting a 5-year review of the Child and Family Services Act and its related resources available to NWT residents. The committee wishes to acknowledge that certain topics are of a sensitive nature and may be triggering for some individuals. Should you become uncomfortable or experience any mental distress, please contact a healthcare provider in your community right away. Our first order of business is to open our meeting with a prayer, and I will ask MLA O'Reilly to offer the prayer this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know you are safe, cause another to know that they are safe. If you wish to understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Dalai Lama.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Our next item on the agenda is review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one item on today's agenda. It is a presentation from the YWCA NWT with regards to the Child and Family Services Review. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burla. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda today? Seeing and hearing none, are there any conflicts of interest today? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as is? MLA Semler, thank you very much. So MLA Semler has moved the agenda, and having reviewed and adopted the, sorry, I'm repeating myself this morning. It's like fake Monday. Today, committee will be hearing from Ms. Maura Meng and members of the YWCA NWT, and we're very thankful to have you here with us today. Thank you very much for making the time for committee, and we really look forward to your presentation today. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels, and presentation materials will be available on the Legislative Assembly's website after the meeting has concluded. To respect physical distancing requirements, all witnesses will be attending by video conference. And I would like to remind all members that, and our witnesses that all comments, questions, and remarks will need to be directed to myself as chair. Both members and the witnesses will need to wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking today. I'll now ask members from Social Development to introduce themselves, and I'll start with the member to my left. Thank you.
Ron Bonatrush, MLA Techo.
Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Rocky Simpson, MLA here for South.
Lisa Semler, MLA Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Thank you very much, members, and I'll now pass it over to Ms. Meng from the YWCA NWT to provide some introductions, and then when you're done, please feel free to go directly into your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us here to do this presentation. Myself, I'm Maura Meng. I'm the advocate coordinator here at the YWCA NWT. This is my colleague Kate.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. It's an opportunity for us to be here today, and hopefully when we're done, we'll be able to add to what you're looking for. My name is Kate Wilson, and I'm the Director for Housing for the YWCA.
Oh, we're having some, we can't hear any audio, so you might be muted on your end there.
Good morning, everyone. Is this better?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Howard Dumbuya-Sise. I'm the Executive Director for the YWCA NWT. We're so excited to do this presentation, and we look forward to any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we really look forward to your presentation before, so please proceed. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Can we change the slide? Okay, so Here at the YWCA NWT, our vision is equity for women and girls in a safe northern society. Our mission is to build a safe and equitable community where women, girls, and families can realize their full potential. Originally known as YWCA Yellowknife, the organization was founded in 1966 to provide housing for single working women. Since then, the YWCA has offered a variety of services to women, girls, and families in Yellowknife and beyond. Housing is still a key component of the YWCA mandate, along with shelter from family violence, after-school care for children, and empowerment programs. In 2017, the YWCA Yellowknife became the YWCA NWT to reflect the broader services and the reach across the territory. So YWCA NWT is one of 33 member organizations that comprise the YWCA Canada and the country's oldest and largest women's organization. In turn, YWCA Canada is affiliated with the YWCA World, which is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. Next slide, please. So for our programs, we operate 2 family violence shelters, Allison McAteer House in Yellowknife, which is a secure and anonymous family violence shelter for women and children to receive support while they're fleeing violence. It's been operating since 1986. The shelter has 6 bedrooms with a capacity of 12 beds. It also supports a 24-hour crisis support line. And it helps with things like advocacy, referrals, form filling, as well as a variety of in-house programming for women and children who are staying there. Allison McAteer House also helps people to get emergency protection orders over the phone. So the majority of EPOs granted across the NWT are done through Allison McAteer House. We also operate Sutherland House in Fort Smith, which is an 8-bed facility. The YWCA took over the shelter in 2014, and it offers very similar services to Allison McAteer. In addition to that, for shelters, we also have a second stage shelter called Lynn's Place. It's for women and women with children who are restabilizing after leaving a violent relationship. It opened in 2014. It has 24-hour staffing and secure building, and men aren't allowed in the building. It contains 18 suites on 3 floors. Rent is affordable using the CMHC affordability guidelines, and tenants stay up to 3 years in the building. There's also a variety of in-house services and therapy and support group, traditional craft circles, advocacy and referrals, literacy programming, and food security supports offered in the building. Next slide, please. So the other program we're going to highlight is transitional family housing. So transitional housing program has many years' experience successfully supporting NWT families in crisis. So the YWCA has been operating some form of housing program since it was founded in 1966. Families that we house are unable to get housing on their own due to all sorts of circumstances, such as significant financial barriers, family breakdown, addictions or mental health challenges, or unforeseen emergencies that people can't bounce back from. One of the goals with THP is that we help to create a stronger and more resilient community for residents and offer programs designed to help residents thrive. So housing people often isn't enough. People need support to maintain their stability. Other services that we offer through this program include a job placement program, computer classes, cooking classes, community building stuff like holiday get-togethers and barbecues, literacy programs, advocacy and referrals to other services, and food programs. So we previously operated out of Rock Hill, the apartment complex, until the apartment burned down in 2018. At Rock Hill, we had some rental units in the community as well. Like when we were there, we had some rental units in the community as well, where we housed clients that had a lower acuity, so who were more able to thrive like they just need a little bit to be able to succeed and to stabilize. But at Rock Hill, we were able to house people who were higher acuity. So currently, we operate our transitional housing program through the scattered site model, where we rent units for our clients with private landlords who in turn rent from us. The quality of our program has suffered somewhat, and it's harder to help the most vulnerable families in those situations. The bulk of our clients are able to function fairly well on their own, and the supports aren't quite as rigorous. But the most vulnerable people we served at Rock Hill. So also our liability is much greater because we hold so many leases and we have to rent them all out. Next slide, please. So child and youth programs, we have an after-school program, which provides after-school care from dismissal until 5:30 for school children up to age 11. And this program operates out of 6 Yellowknife schools. They also offer full day care during PD days and March break programming. This program is offered at an affordable rate, and it's licensed childcare. It's been in operation since 1974. Another program is the Family Center. So it's a free drop-in program for families with young children up to age 5. They provide outings on a regular basis and an enriched environment that focuses on mental and physical wellness for families. It's basically a playgroup, and it was created with the intent of reducing the isolation of parents with young children. They also have a toy lending library and bring in community partners as speakers to help teach parenting skills. This program has been running since 2017. And then the next one I want to highlight is Project Child Recovery. So Dudes Club operates under Project Child Recovery, and it's a proactive program that promotes healthy coping strategies for children and youth 4 days a week. It focuses on creating strong and resilient young leaders by creating a safe place for youth to explore their passions and gifts and ensure that they have the support services they need. It also provides supportive peer group sessions to address common concerns and promote choices that are nonviolent. It's a free program accessible for youth 8 to 14. It's essentially a violence prevention program, and it's one program that we have that's focused on boys and youth, though it does have some mixed programming. Mixed programming in it. So it helps at-risk youth to learn about things like healthy relationships, emotions, boundaries, encouraging community involvement. Project Child Recovery it's operated out of some Yellowknife schools and the school in Delo. A related program is Girl Space, which is a leadership program for girls aged 8 to 17. The program runs during the school year and often has special programming during March break and the summer. The programs that we offer are designed to follow a wraparound service delivery model. So with the exception of after school and the shelters, all these programs were offered at Rock Hill. So being housed in the same building made it easy for people, for these programs to complement each other and for people to access them who were at risk. Next slide, please. So I'll just get into why we see families getting involved with child protective services. Next slide. Thanks. So we see poverty as the most significant factor that sees families end up involved with child protection. Poverty is about more than just income. It's also about people's ability to fully participate in society. So it's it's economic, but it's also social and psychological. And it just leaves people in a more vulnerable situation. So it's easy for poor people to lose their kids to the, it's easier for poor people to lose their kids to the state than to middle class or wealthy people. More obvious factors include having access to food and clothing and housing and transportation and reliable childcare. But poverty is implicated in addictions for people across the NWT, as well as having more volatile relationships. Implicit bias can factor into a social worker's decision, but the ways that poverty can lead to involvement with CPS is deeply, deeply entrenched. So it's more than just simply parents not able to meet a child's material needs. Of all the cases that I've seen for families that have been involved with child protection, the only families I've come across that have stable income were families that had that the vulnerability was around intimate partner violence. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to outline a little bit of the history around child protection. So the critique about poverty and involvement with child protection services has been around since it was created and exists across the Western world. So it's the legacy of the English Poor Law of 1834. And what the English Poor Law did was it distinguished in legal terms between the deserving and the undeserving poor. So the deserving poor were considered to be poor through no fault of their own. If they were disabled, if they were too old or too young, if they were sick and they couldn't provide themselves, then they were seen as deserving. The undeserving poor were seen as lazy and having a weak moral character. They were considered a burden on their communities and undeserving of any but the harshest treatment from the good, hardworking people and the instruments of the state. This ideology is far-reaching, and basically it forms a lot of the basis of how our social welfare programs function and are delivered. Another relevant one you can see is income support and how income support is handed out. Next slide. Influenced by English poor law, early forms of public assistance in Canada were intentionally punitive and demeaning so as to separate the few deserving from the many undeserving poor. And also ensure that the working poor always had a little bit more than the absolute poor. So neglected children were among the few groups characterized as deserving, and the mothers were mostly viewed as undeserving. So in 1901, a coalition of charitable and church groups petitioned the government to enact legislation to facilitate their work with neglected and abandoned children, which is the preamble to the first child welfare laws in Canada. In support of the proposed legislation, a Supreme Court justice offered this comment, that children of drunken and immoral parents should have protection by law so as to enable them to grow up to live a useful life and not by force of their surroundings become untruthful, unclean, and immoral and add to the pauper and criminal class of the community. So, as you can see, if you mix in racism and all these other factors into the mix, how devastating this has been. Canada's first child protection legislation was intended to break the cycle through separating families from their parents rather than by providing support to needy families. Next slide, please. So how does this impact our present situation? You can see it in all sorts of funny ways, like a a child protection worker's client isn't the family or the parents, it's the individual children. Categories of deserving and undeserving continue to devolve around lines of individual pathology. And we don't really, in community development, kind of gets left out of the equation. We have a lack of much needed support systems for families. The system is generally seen as stigmatizing and punitive. And we've been stuck in this false dichotomy for more than 100 years, and we're balancing between conservative or progressive social values. It moves one way or the other way based on what's happening in the culture. And media, politicians, and the public, we're kind of in a position where we're still acting as judges. And next slide, please. So to prepare for this presentation, I went through our staff and clients and former clients and also child protection workers to get some of their opinions. And to answer the question of what are the most challenging needs for families in the NWT that cause them to be involved with child protection services, most of their responses focused on a lack of resources and support services. So these responses include a lack of safe, affordable access to housing, addictions and mental health challenges, trauma, family violence, the high cost of living, lack of safe and affordable childcare services, lack of employment options, lack of educational attainment, no timely access to treatment options or aftercare, and a lack of affordable housing supports and policies where family violence is a factor. Next slide, please. So some of the highlights from my conversations were also that people most often fall into child protection services because of struggles with addictions and trauma. So while that's happening, they may also be experiencing family violence and don't have a strong support network to help them. So we need more support for people who have experienced trauma. The lack of comprehensive support when people get back from treatment is also a barrier. People need sustained and helping relationships and time to build trust. Counselors don't always stay in their positions long, and this can be a barrier to healing. There's a lack of trust of child protection services and other support programs. So where do people go for help? The way we see it, clients tend to come back to the transitional housing program over and over because we have time to build trust with them. So we don't judge them, whereas CPW is, a child protection worker is kind of mandated to judge. So there can be like really great child protection workers, but at the end of the day, they're still in a position where they have to conduct themselves in a certain way, and they have to build certain sort of relationship. It's hard to be supportive of people when you have to report to this person and that person, and they don't always trust your decisions as a child protection worker. So women in domestic violence situations are made to be responsible for their abuse in so many ways, despite the fact that they are victims. So the major barrier that traps people, it's a major barrier that traps people in abusive relationships because they don't get help as they're afraid they'll be reported to child protection services. Next slide, please. So what are the supports that work well? Overwhelmingly, the responses to this question of what supports are working well for families in need focuses on helping families to meet their basic needs. These supports included subsidized rent in public housing, supports from Indigenous governments and organizations for for food with food cards or assistance with living expenses, food banks and soup kitchens in some communities, emergency protection orders, support service agreements that help people meet their basic needs. That's through child protection. Getting people into treatment services with elders or counselors, women's shelters, victim services, and legal aid. Next slide, please. I myself used to be a child protection worker. I was a child protection worker for 2 years in Béchacon. And from there, I moved to YWCA and I worked at Rock Hill. And I could see that there was things that were working at Rock Hill, and I was really proud of the work we were doing there. Rock Hill previously housed our transitional housing program. Staff and clients worked at creating an environment that was welcoming and informal. We helped people with what they needed in an open and non-judgmental way. Also, we could be gatekeepers. So this was a big asset. We had 24-hour staffing and security. So security staff we also encourage security staff to foster positive relationships with people. So they help people to manage challenges that they had with stuff like guest management. So they would do things like pre-arrange with residents. If a resident had an issue with guest management and somebody came to their house and they needed the guest gone, so then the security can come and knock on the door and tell them this person has to be out because this is the rules of the building, even though it was not that strict, it's prearranged. So the strength of the transitional housing program was that we could focus on developing a healthy and positive community in the building with different services available, but also be able to provide security to residents and avoid challenges that come along with managing a household. And the informal services helped a lot because it meant that people were comfortable to just come down and have a coffee and have some like time and attention. Next slide, please. In a program evaluation that we had done by an outside evaluator, an independent evaluator, she noted that transitional housing program staff say that programming and staff-client relationships are designed to stabilize and help families to learn to be in their own home and be together in a safe place. So this is done by providing short-term, no-cost emergency housing or transitional housing that is about $300 cheaper than market rent. And that $300 is literally people's food money for the month. On-site evening and weekend security, close association with the RCMP and Child Protection, Yellowknife Health and Social Services Authority in the event of an incident. Although in those cases, generally the CPW would meet with staff of our program to get to enter the unit. So that we could act as that gatekeeper, and we also had food and clothing on site when they were available. We had regular on-site nurses and practitioner visits, one-on-one assistance to find employment, participate in social recreation activities, receive family services such as through the family preservation workers or to secure income assistance in public housing, on-site one-on-one and group activities to strengthen parenting, cooking, computer, and literacy skills to provide opportunities for staff-client interaction. We had collective celebrations on holidays to foster a sense of community and relationships of mutual support. It was one of those buildings where everybody knew everybody. So, like, in what apartment building nowadays do you know all your neighbors? Next slide, please. So we also offered aftercare. When clients leave the transitional housing program, they frequently return and continue to access services. This includes things like dropping in for coffee or getting help with food and other material supports, help with advocacy, attending social gatherings, or to refer friends and family to the program. So in addition, many clients need our program multiple times. Clients who were unsuccessful in stabilizing their family situations and exited the program and the building were given second, third, and fourth chances to help get their lives back on track. And also, with also balancing the needs of other residents, the trust that we were able to develop with these clients was integral, because it meant that they felt comfortable in coming back to us to get services. We're a little bit concerned about the prospect of having to, if we're put in a situation where to get clients out of our program, we have to send them to tenant relations every time. It means that we're not going to be able to take them back. So that's a serious concern of ours. Next slide, please. Impacts of the Rock Hill fire. So when we lost our building in October 2018, our impact was diminished. So the in-house services we provided were foundational, and we no longer have the space to provide many of these services. Though we continue to house families and respond to community need, we can't reach the most vulnerable families. These very vulnerable families may be dealing with family breakdown, addictions, recovering from domestic abuse, or families being reunited after separation. The fire was truly devastating, and it continues to be. The work has become more challenging without the building, as we can't provide 24-hour security or the in-depth support that in-house services provides compared to a mixed site model. So we continue to provide non-judgmental services, and hundreds of families come through our program every year. However, currently we are less able to help families with complex needs. So having to rely on private landlords means that we're vulnerable to the whims and politics of the landlord. Some landlords are supportive and flexible, and some are not. Our goal is always to help our residents to have secure and independent housing. But if we house a client in a unit that we rent, oftentimes we can't get the lease transferred to the client in their own name. So despite having a good tenancy record with us and being stable with us, it means that oftentimes we can't get them into their own name because maybe their income isn't this, maybe they don't have a good credit history, and then it leaves us liable and not as able to help the next person who needs it. For clients that may have RCMP or child protection involvement, we are less able to help them through that because we can no longer act as the gatekeeper for them. And their situation can derail more quickly. Child protection is now involved with families quite a bit more than it had been at Rock Hill. And the situations, they can devolve a lot more quickly, and it's harder to see. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? If 54% of children were involved in child protection services because of neglect and 31% because of family violence in the 2019-2020 fiscal year, then 85% of the child protection investigations probably could have been avoided. Everyday social care is the glue that binds us together. It connects us to each other. and allows us to build trusting relationships. So being a good carer needs to be good for the carer and the receiver, and it brings us closer together as people. It's non-stigmatizing and inclusive, and it restores people's dignity. Next slide, please. So what can the GNWT do? Some suggestions include a support benefit for survivors of abuse who are trying to separate from their partners. We could look into publishing more data about parental income sources. That's not so easy, but I see a lot of data, a lot of race-based data, and that's important. But we're not looking at the intersection of everything, which just, so it makes it more difficult to address the real problem. We could use more advocates for families. We can get options for clients about services, or get opinions from clients about the services they're receiving. As far as I know, that's not going to happen with child protection services. But every other service provider, we have to provide some sort of data about how we're impacting people. We can move the income assistance program back to health and social services. That can be a very big barrier for people in accessing non-judgmental services. Nonprofit services are on the front line, and they know how to help people and what people need. So this is the one I want to highlight, as that's what we do. So basically providing more services and coming at this at different angles is what we need. If everybody's access through child protection is either voluntary services or involuntary services, it's kind of a narrow access point. But if we can work together more, we can provide a bigger pool of support services. So next slide, please. Advice for partnering with community-based organizations. So to have more successful outcomes for families who are or may become involved with child protection services, communities need to support services for families. Child protection workers are in positions where they need to do it all, and the amount of accountability is not going to make that better. So accountability is necessary, but spending 85% of your work time on paperwork doesn't make you a more effective helper. Only the GNWT can serve the whole territory, but within communities, our strengths need to be leveraged. So nonprofit and government partnership can help in several ways. Community-based organizations can roll out programs quicker and cheaper than government. It's easier for community-based organizations to form trusting relationships with clients. It's easier for families to seek help from community-based organizations, as there's often less stigma and less danger. We can respond more quickly to community needs, as we can change policies and practices as we see fit, so long as it fits our mandate. And we can provide more informal help, which people often prefer. We can also help inform child protection services because we can see a family's needs and goals more quickly because we have that time to build relationships with them. So it's probably worth noting that not all community-based organizations have the same capacity or have as functional leadership, but some may be well managed, and others may not be as good helpers for community members. But if partnerships between community and government organizations are sustained, it should be easier to tease that apart and help build nonprofit organizations as well. Next slide, please. Is there a next slide? So, in summary, the child welfare system, as it stands, simply doesn't have the capacity to meet the needs of families. You can't help people by transforming them from something that you don't value into something you're willing to value. I realize that sounds totally absurd, but this is how we've developed since the 19th century. By supporting more innovative community-based organizations and programs like Rock Hill, we can increase capacity for the sector. More diverse forms of support will help fill the gaps and restore dignity to families affected by poverty, addictions, and family violence. Thank you. Would you like to add anything?
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate the time you took today to present to committee. And what I'm going to do is just right away turn it over to committee members, and I'll start with MLA Knockleby for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to say thank you to the YWCA for presenting today. I had the fortune of being a director with the Y. I wondered if I should have declared my conflict earlier at the time of the Rock Hill fire. So I very much understand the devastation that had on the organization and the impacts that it did in being able to deliver the services. And I just want to give kudos to the organization for not only continuing on through that time, but also providing needed supports through COVID. I do want to point out that the regular members of the Standing Committee were able to get more funding in the budget for the anti-poverty fund. So that was just in recognition of the fact that NGOs and other non-government groups can provide services sometimes that the GNWT cannot. And I hope that the Y will access and look to get some of that funding. I just wanted to say that it was very interesting to me to hear the history of why our system has been set up the way it has. I was not aware of this deserving versus undeserving poor, but when you explain that, it really shows me why we've ended up where we've ended up, and a very big disconnect of the fact that mothers are considered to be undeserving and children are deserving. And I very much understand how that would be a frustration for you. So moving on though, I could talk about all the good you do for a very, very long time. So my question is, recently you were denied funding for the expansion of Lynn's Place. First, I just want to give kudos to you for building a building that could be expanded upon from an HVAC system. You had prepared for this future eventuality. So as an engineer, I really liked that proactiveness. So I was really disappointed to hear that the funding was not awarded. So I guess my question is, what does the Y see as the next step forward towards getting that funding in place? And what can we do to help facilitate that? Because to me, that seems like a really good next step. And then as well, at some point, getting a new Rock Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knockleby. Ms. Meng?
I can answer that. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So we're currently in the process of doing a feasibility study in terms of the expansion itself, because we want to make sure it's something we can afford since the rapid rehousing application was declined, because that application was going to allow us to have the units for basically free. But now with the fact that we may have to explore the co-investment option, we need to look at whether this is something we can afford. So we're currently working with a consultant, and it is our hope that within the next couple of weeks or so, we'll be reaching out to MLAs and the housing to lobby for some support around that, because with the co-investment, we need some money from CMHC, but we also need the support from the GNWT in terms of getting the rest of that funding. But we're really in need of doing that, and we're still pursuing that option. And so we'll be in contact soon with everyone regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Dubayas Sase. Am I saying that right? Perfect. Thank you
Yes,
so much,
it's
MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You can definitely hit me up for any of that support letters, et cetera, that you need. I guess my question then to follow up on that is how much of a delay has this caused? I'm not, and I should probably know when the co-investment funding would be awarded, but, you know, are we looking at, if you had gotten the rapid housing funding, are we now a year later because you have to apply on this funding again? And is it really...
Yeah.
Is it easy enough for you to translate the application under the rapid housing into the application for the co-investment, or is that a lot more work for your staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Ms. Dubai-SSA? Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think there's definitely at least a year or two of delay because we have to, with the rapid rehousing, the initial plan was to do a modular build. So that was a different layout and different cost that was taken into place because of the fact of having to build the structure down south and then move it up north. And so now we're looking with the co-investment, and because we no longer have that requirement of having to make a modular, we're looking into the stick build. So the stick build is definitely a better cost when you compare it to the modular, but now it's taken us some time to go back and reevaluate the structure and reevaluate the cost. And also in terms of the co-investment, we also have to go through that process with CMHC to apply for that funding, and also go through the process to get the remaining 25% of the funding that we need. So it's definitely going to take us time. If we had the rapid rehousing approved, like we'll be in the process right now of doing the structure, because the requirement was to get that done within the 12-month period. But this has definitely pushed us back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dubai-SSA. Members, does anybody else have any additional questions today? MLA O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation and everything you do in Yellowknife and across the NWT. Much appreciated. I was a bit surprised that sort of in your wrap-up and in your asks, there wasn't more of an explicit request for funding to replace Rock Hill. Like, to me, that seems like the biggest gap here in what you're able to do and what you used to be able to do. And, I'm trying to offer those programs through, across the city, dealing with people living in different buildings and situations. It must be just a real nightmare. So is there a push, or is there going to be a campaign or something to replace Rock Hill? I would certainly support that, and I think you probably get support from a number of other MLAs. Like, that was such a critical service and a function that you folks offered. And I just don't think you can replicate that by having your scattered services across the city. So anyways, all that to say, please, or I think you need to start a campaign or get something going to replace Rock Hill as a place for people to live. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Ms. Dubai-SSA.
Thank you. And so going back to the rapid rehousing expansion, that was the plan. That's why we had applied with the rapid rehousing, because if we can do the expansion on the Lynn's Place lot, we can be able to have a similar, not quite exactly the same as Rock Hill, but with the rapid rehousing expansion, the plan was to have something similar to Rock Hill. And I know there's like a lot of discussion right now around the old Rock Hill lot. And so that is something that we're definitely looking into as well down the road. But we want to make sure that we focus our priority on one thing and get that done. And then we can look at other options, because we don't want to try to target various things. And so that will make it hard for us to get our message out there. But we're definitely pushing, and we'll definitely be lobbying for support regarding that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Emily Semler?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Just going to the part where you talked about advice for partnering with community-based, I agree, and I think we've discussed this like within committee, and I think we've heard from others that, Child and Family Services when we talk about child and family services, we usually talk about the negative part of that. We never talk about, like, we never really hear about what supports are being provided, because the families, like in your presentation, are afraid to come forward, are afraid to even report their own violence against them, like because of that fear. And I'm just, and this is one of the things that I'm glad to hear, and I'm glad that we're going to hear it, like we've heard it a couple of times now, that Child and Family Services can be the investigator part to do this, but they can't be the prevention and the support, because there's that trust is, that fear, and knowing that majority, well, almost 100% is Indigenous population of families. So it's more of a comment, and I'm just wanting to say that I'm glad that we're even just the couple presentations that we've had, that we're getting this theme, because I feel like sometimes Child and Family Services thinks they can do it all, and you said it, they want to do it all, but they can't do it in the small communities, they can't do it everywhere, you can't be the person that takes the child and then provides the support. That trust is gone. So I think there is good space for working with the NGOs and if they're interested and trying to. But one of my questions is within your organization, like you talked about housing, you talked about all income support. Within Child and Family Services, how do you feel that you would be able to do, like the funding wise, we always talk about here that there's less money for prevention, there's more money to hire all the child protection workers, and to make sure that they're out there following up on complaints and making sure. But then the prevention part, we're not front loading the funding. So as an NGO, this is my worry, that if we say, okay, we want to work with NGOs, but we know that there's not a large amount of money. And in your presentation, you said you can do more with less. So could you elaborate on maybe if you have some of these ideas that you could work with, and with how, where the money, how we as a committee can make recommendations, on where to focus money from Child and Family Services, not saying we can do this, but if we can hear exactly where we should be recommending this money go to help your clients.
Thank you, MLA Semler. Mr. Bayasase?
Thank you. So I think regarding this, it's interesting. I wanted Kate to pitch in a bit too, because with the current funding that we get with housing, usually the requirements is that we house up to 40 families, but the housing have been so creative in terms of being able to house more people with the funding that we get, because we work closely with the clients and we seek other funding sources, not just rely on one pot of funding. And so we've been really creative. And also with our staffing, we don't pay similar wage to the GNWT. So when we do get funding for programs, we're able to stretch it out a bit longer. Kate, I don't know if you wanted to add like an example regarding that, like the amount of funding that you get from NWT Housing Corp and how we use that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bayasase. Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, there is a lot of need for family support in Yellowknife. Right now, it's non-existent. When we had Rock Hill, families had a place to gather. They had a place to go with their children. They could go into the office or program room anytime, attend programs and get supports that they needed, and it was very timely. Now the building is not there. There's nothing in the community where families can really go and just be. And these are the vulnerable families that no landlord will want to take. So what we find is that those families are still out there because we are 100% dependent on landlords, and the landlords, as soon as they see their name, do not want them in their units. Right now, as we're speaking, we've got about 50 plus families on our waiting list. Now, Yellowknife is a catcher for families. They end up here and they are here and they want to be here. And so then as a community, we ought to be able to provide the services to support them. If they are not with us, you know that the children are with child protection, and that's not the place for children to grow. So we need to really put something together for families where they can just go be, get support, get their needs met, talk to somebody, commune with each other, make friends with each other, a healthy place that they can gather. We find that that's what most families want. It's not going for the treatment. It's the everyday today solving of issues that help them to stabilize so that they can do another day. It's communing with friends, it's communing with people, it's getting engaged with their children in positive ways. That's how they thrive. So if we need a place for families. We desperately need Rock Hill back. We want to build something quickly next door to Lynn's Place. Right? Lynn's Place is a what do you call it? It's a second stage housing. And so we're going to be building family housing next to it. How vulnerable will be the people at when this is from my point of view. When we lost Rock Hill, my thinking was, okay, campaign, see whether we can get something built in the Rock Hill space. But then everything was so delaying, so we had to go with the second best option, which is expansion of Lynn's Place. It will do a bit, but when you have families that have 4, 5, 6 children, a 2-bedroom will not do it for them because you have laws to follow. So in a nutshell, we critically have to look in NWT, in Yellowknife, and see what we can do to truly and honestly support the vulnerable in our community so that we can uphold their dignity. Because dignity is being lost. Where is the mom's dignity to nurture the child when the child is not with them? When she's not able to feed the baby, when she's not able to, deal with the relationship issues in her life, that she's made to feel that she's the cause of it. Instead of helping the man or helping the family, as a unit. So the family right now is not a unit. When it comes to child protection, it's not a unit. So unless we really truly deal with poverty and deal with family violence and deal with and educate men, to be responsible for their end of it, since I'm saying men because it's majority of them, so that we're able to really support families. This will it's just going to be a cycle. Now, money-wise, any money that is given to us, most of it goes to the clients because we look at client needs. But we also have to have capacity that we can be there, we can be there in the long term to help families. I've been in this work for over 20 years. And there's never been a year that there's no waiting list. Every year we house way more people than we're supposed to. We're supposed to house 40. We've housed 97 families in scattered units in Yellowknife. So we do more. But then our funding is just year to year. every end of March, we have to look for money to continue to do our work. That is not a model that is sustainable. How do you continue to do this work like that? At Rock Hill, it wasn't like that. We were quite stable. Now, with the model that we have right now, we have to look for funding every year. The staff that we have been with us for quite a while, and they love what they do. But how do you sustain staff morale when at the end of every year you have to look for money to pay them to do the work, and then you're not sure if you're going to continue to give support to the families that you serve in, that you're not sure if you're going to be able to continue to hold the lease, so that families can continue to live in those homes. Anyway, I've got quite a few questions for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. MLA Semler?
Yes, and thank you for all that information. It's very helpful. I know from myself, even since I've been elected, that there are families that I've actually, because in Inuvik, where I'm from, the wait list for housing is enormous, and there is no units, and the private market, they don't get in, especially with their income support, because they won't take a month-by-month lease. So there's all these barriers, and I know that I have actually said for some of the women, like, maybe it is best go to Yellowknife, because there is more, and like you said, you're the place where everybody seems to go, because you're able to find places within the city for them to be housed with their children. And so, this is an issue, and that's where I think that people shouldn't have to uproot to come to Yellowknife. They should be able to have support in the communities that they're from. There should be emergency housing. There should be these different types of things. And those are prevention tools, and that's where we say, like, if you're homeless and you have no money and you can't get income support and you've got all these barriers, of course then you just kind of give up, and you think, okay, take my kids, at least they'll be fed and they'll have a roof over their head. But is it better? Probably not, no. And I hear you with the struggles with the year-to-year funding. In my last job before becoming an MLA, that was one of the things as an Indigenous organizations, a lot of the funding for some of the programs were year-by-year funding. And, the federal government did fund a lot of the programs where I worked, and they agreed to more of a 5-year, 3-year funding, which you can secure staff. And that's the thing is, if you have good staff, and you don't know if you've got funding come March 31st, they've got bills to pay, so they may be looking for other jobs, and then you get high turnover. And that's not good, especially when those people are making good relationships with these families. So I agree with you. I think we need to look at more block funding, 3-5-year longer term funding, so that we can secure staff, so we can, plan long term. And my one question is currently, do one of you know how much you actually get per year from GNWT Health and Social Services right now?
Thank you very much, MLA Semler. Ms. Dubaya-Sese?
So the funding for the housing, we get it from the NWT Housing Corp. So we currently get $422 annually.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dubaya-Sese. And is there also funding that you receive through Health and Social Services or NTHSSA as well?
No, those funding are all different. So for the shelter, we get funding from NT Social Services. And so part of the housing too is we're always looking for money from the city or from the Canadian Women Foundation. We're always searching for money in order to be able to do the work, because the money we get from NWT Housing Corp to sustain the housing program is not sufficient at all.
No, thank you very much for that. MLA Knockleby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a lot of apartment buildings in my riding that likely house several of your clients, I would assume. I'm getting a bunch of messages pretty regularly about conditions within these apartment buildings. I went out yesterday, took a look, and it looks like a ghetto around some of them. I didn't go in, but garbage and mattresses, boarded up windows, broken windows, etc. So not only are you now helping people pay top dollar to be in these buildings, they're not actually very good, in very good condition, a lot of them. I'm curious to know, is there an impact from the state of these buildings on how Child and Family Services is perceiving the care being provided by the families in these buildings? For example, you know, if you have a child with health issues and they're in sort of an unhealthy building per se, is Child and Family Services going to take that child because they're not being adequately dealt with when it's out of the control of the parents to deal with the housing that they're in? They're on waiting lists to get moved to better housing conditions. I'm going to be pursuing this with both the major REIT as well as the housing minister because it's like third world conditions, it looks like back there. So I guess that's my question. Maybe a little bit about your relationship with the large REITs as a landlord and what that's doing and impacting on children being seized. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knockleby. Mr. Biasese?
I think kids can take that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wilson?
We work with the landlords, and of course, NPR REIT is the largest landlord in town. It used to be that we were able to house families, and personally, with the Y, we refuse to send our families to some of those units that are really like high risks, and so we work with them to find appropriate housing for our families. So our families, majority of them are in places where you wouldn't even know that they are there because they are within their community. So we place them everywhere, except those units or those apartments that we know are not in good space. Needless to say, most of their apartments in Yellowknife that the landlord has is not in the greatest shape. We are on top of things, so as soon as it's not, as soon as there's any maintenance that needs to be done, they do it, because if they don't, then I'm handling them. So they respond very timely to our needs. We work with other landlords as well, about 6 landlords and individual landlords. We have 40 units plus that we lease in our name with all different kinds of landlords. So when a unit is not safe for a family to be in, we move them and put them in a safe place, and we get the landlord to deal with it. So that's how we've approached it. But right now, as it is, there is 0 vacancy in Yellowknife. And so the landlords are, NPR is not taking any of our clients because they don't have anything. And they are struggling to, it's a new focus, it's a completely new business now. It's very, it's a fund, and from what I understand, it's very money focused. And so, yeah, it's made it very difficult for us to currently find places to house families. Even those families that we used to transfer the leases after they've been there and lived there and have had good tenancy record, that we were able to transfer, those families, they are not, the landlord is not transferring the lease into their own name anymore, unless they have good credit record, or they have good credit record. No, so it's become very difficult. Now, I don't know of a case where child protection has apprehended someone like kids because of that. But then they always have a reason to go in there to begin with. And so the reason that they go in there might not be the housing condition, but it might be an investigation that they were doing because there is abuse or there are other reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Emily Knockleby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that, and I'm glad that those families have you there to advocate for them. But it also raises the concern of what happens when you decide that you no longer want to work anymore and retire, and you have that turnover of staff where it shouldn't fall on one person's shoulders or several of your staff's shoulders to advocate for safe living conditions. But I am really glad to hear that you're obviously very live to that concern and making sure that that's not impacting children or that poverty isn't being seen as neglect. I'll keep you posted on my conversations with Northview as well. I just wonder if you have any, I know at one point when I was involved with the Y, there was the offer of a federal government building to potentially replace Rock Hill. And I do feel a big hand in that building did not get taken up because there was definitely concerns that were beyond, I think, what the Y was capable of dealing with at the time. However, is there any other building on the horizon or any other conversation happening with the federal government for an existing building versus a new build for Rock Hill or replacement of Rock Hill? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Ms. Dubaia-Sase?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've been in talks with local CMHC rep trying to get information, especially regarding this too. We started asking questions around if there is any existing surplus, and so far the discussion has been none. And so we continue to explore those options as well, because we're looking at if there's any existing building in town that we can use, something that's not going to put us in more legal liability, because with the last building that was offered to us, there was a lot of strings attached to it that we were unable to meet as an organization. And so we're still in search of that. But currently at this point, there is nothing available. We have an upcoming meeting, though, later this week with the local rep as well to go through that application that I spoke earlier about, and so we'll also be exploring that option and seeing what other stuff that we can do. And like I said earlier, our goal is really to get something like Rock Hill, and we need that space. We need the support for the families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dubaia-Sase. Members, are there any additional questions or comments today? MLA Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I guess I'm always interested in social issues, and coming from Hay River, I spend a lot of time with clients dealing with various issues. I guess in dealing with issues, there are a lot of gaps, and and I hear it here. There's the financial support that should go to nonprofits is never there. It's never enough. It's never certain. It's usually only a year long, and that affects the programming, and it also affects probably how the clients, the supports the clients have access to, and probably the way the clients are treated. And in Yellowknife, it appears that, and listening to the presentation, is that you do have a lot more here than we have in the communities. So in saying that, I guess I'd like to know, I suspect that there is clients that from outside Yellowknife that come here and use your services. Can you indicate or tell me there, what have you heard from those clients that would suggest they would like to stay in the communities, and what supports are missing, in the communities that would be able to allow them to stay in their homes and not have to come here and address the issues where they do have family support. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Simpson. Ms. Dubaia-Sase?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think with regards to that, we have many clients that are coming from communities, some of them are coming to Yellowknife because of their current living conditions, so like overcrowding. And in some of the cases with our family violence shelter, we have clients that are coming to Yellowknife and not wanting to return back to the community because they don't feel safe going back and because they don't have that ongoing support. And there's just a high sense of stigma, especially in smaller communities when you have victims that are fleeing and being afraid for their safety as well, because most times the spouse, the partner will stay in the community. And we even have some cases where the partner end up coming to Yellowknife. But in Yellowknife, we have the safe shelter where we can, like, the women can stay, and we provide the wraparound support around safety planning and other stuff like that that enables them to stay. But those are some of the issues. I'm not sure if Kate want to add anything to that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wilson?
Yes. Yesterday, for example, we were doing a point in count. So we trying to count the families that are homeless. And it's a system that the federal government wants all those that receive funding for homelessness to do. So all across Canada, they do a point-in-time count. And so we're contacting those families that are on our waiting list and finding out all sorts of reasons why they are not returning back home. And majority of the ones that I did, they basically said the services are not there. There's quite a few of them that said the education, they want their kids to get the education, but then the education system is so low there and they're afraid their kids are not going to be able to get what they need. So they really are in Yellowknife to do that. There are others that also said that there's a lot of overcrowding and every now and then they get kicked out of the parents' house or the sister's house and they have nowhere to go and they couch surf in their own community and there's no housing for them. Therefore, they are in Yellowknife to find housing. And some also said the family members have come to Yellowknife and have established in Yellowknife and they're doing okay with their addictions and stuff. And so they want to come and be with a family that is already established in Yellowknife. So I always say that Yellowknife homelessness problem is a community problem. So when people show up from the communities into Yellowknife, then you know that there are issues that are going on in the communities that they are fleeing from. And usually it tends to go in cycles. So you have some years people will be coming from the Satu, and some years will be coming from Ray, and some years will be coming from Novik. And so it depends on what's going on in the community. But usually it's social violence, lack of housing, and the addictions that is going on there, and family overcrowding situations, majority of them.
Thank you very much. Ms.
you.
Wilson, MLA Simpson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question I have is that, we know that the government of the Northwest Territories don't like to hand out money easily to nonprofits, unfortunately. And if you were able to be offered, supports from the GNWT, what would be your three main supports that you'd require from us? Because at the end of the day, I like the comment you made is that you kind of look at one or two things and you try and do that well and get it, in terms of projects, get it done and move on to another one. And that way things do get done. So I'm just wondering, what are the top three priorities in terms of government support that you would be looking at? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Simpson. Ms. YWCA?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So I think the key support for us is really around, it's really around the infrastructure. So housing is definitely a priority for us. The second support that we're looking for is multi-year and stable funding options. And the next support we're looking for is really around the partnership with the government and working with them closely with regards to some of our programming and if our clients need support in terms of referrals and treatment. Because currently with the existing integrated, with the existing integrated case management, as NGOs, we're not able to refer clients to that if they need ongoing support with other things like seeking help for mental health crises or addictions and things like that. So we really like to build on the partnership with GNWT as well. But our key priority is really around getting that housing that we need and the replacement of Rock Hill. And the biggest one too is around the stability of multi-year funding for our programs, not just year by year. And we hope, we're just hoping each year to get the funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biosese. Members, are there any additional questions this morning? Seeing none, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you not only for your presentation this morning, but also for the work that you do in our community. The work you do is invaluable, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of that work in order to speak with us this morning. Thank you so much to all three of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
No, we really appreciate you taking the time away from your clients who need your service, and so we really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And can I get a motion to move in camera from a member? MLA Knockleby. Thank you.